2017 was a year that was packed with game releases, and some of those games unfortunately did not live up to expectations, and they left us a little bit disappointed, and in this video we're gonna cover those titles. Let's take a look at 12 big PlayStation 4 titles that disappointed gamers. Some of these titles aren't absolutely bad, however gamers were just expecting more. Let's get right into this. Mass Effect Andromeda. Mass Effect Andromeda is one where it was gonna be very hard for this game to live up to the expectations. The original Mass Effect trilogy is seen as one of the best, if not the best, gaming trilogy ever, even with the lackluster ending that Mass Effect 3 had. So you know expectations were very high for Mass Effect Andromeda, and it did not deliver big time. Mass Effect Andromeda does have some solid gameplay mechanics, however, it falters in many areas, especially the storytelling. Mass Effect is a franchise that was built on a quality story, and Mass Effect Andromeda just doesn't hold a candle to the original trilogy. Outside of that, technically, the game launched at a very poor state, it didn't look very good, and there was a clear downgrade from what we were seeing in previous demos. Mass Effect Andromeda isn't a horrible game, but it really left us wanting more, and at this point, who knows what the future of the franchise is gonna be. Star Wars Battlefront 2. There is so much that could be said on Star Wars Battlefront 2, it's really a shame how Star Wars Battlefront, a franchise that gamers wanted to see back for many years, has really fallen flat with both titles. The first Star Wars Battlefront released back in 2015, that game just lacked content for a $60 release, and we can go on and on about Star Wars Battlefront 2. We'll mention some of the good first. Hey, mechanically and content-wise, the game is better than the first title. It has a single-player campaign this time around, and there's a decent amount of multiplayer material. However, everything that went on with microtransactions really stifled the potential of Star Wars Battlefront 2, and it's going to be remembered as one of the biggest blunders in gaming history. That is not hyperbole, that is just what Star Wars Battlefront 2 ended up being. Who knows at this point if Star Wars Battlefront can reclaim that nostalgic appeal that it had? It's gonna take a lot for EA to right the ship on this one. Hopefully they do it, but Battlefront 2 was a massive disappointment. Knack 2. Unlike Star Wars Battlefront 2 and Mass Effect Andromeda, I don't know what gamers were exactly expecting with Knack 2. It was probably one of the more surprising video game sequels that was announced. The first Knack game was a PlayStation 4 launch title, and gamers were very excited for that. However, that really failed to live up to expectations. But when Sony came back and announced Knack 2, it seemed like they saw Knack as a potential huge franchise. So personally, I was expecting something really good out of Knack 2, but you really didn't get that. While it was a better game than the first Knack, it was released at a budget price point. There was still some major flaws to the game. The story wasn't that great, technically it wasn't on point, and the gameplay still felt a little bit mundane. Again, while Knack 2 is a better game than the first Knack, Knack 2 doesn't scream the potential of becoming a huge franchise, and I don't know if Knack 3 is something Sony's really gonna look at. Friday the 13th, the game. Friday the 13th was a game many gamers were excited for. It was originally released on PC, and then it found its way over to the PlayStation 4. And the issue with Friday the 13th was that at launch, this game was almost unplayable. You could play your private games with friends, but if you wanted to go online and have a lot of games, there were a lot of server issues, technical issues, you name it, Friday the 13th had it. The core fundamentals of the game aren't even that strong. It really just relies on its license to get by, and that's not enough for a game in 2017. This is one that definitely disappointed us. Valkyria Revolution. From a personal standpoint, this was probably my biggest disappointment from 2017. Valkyria Chronicles was a fantastic game from the excellent story, great characters, well-done strategy-oriented gameplay, and the follow-up Valkyria Chronicles 2 was a great game. That was only released on the PlayStation Portable. Valkyria Chronicles 3 was also a great game, and that title never even found its way over stateside. There is an English patch online if you are interested in that, but a spin-off title in Valkyria Revolution just wasn't what fans wanted. The story was a far cry from the quality of the Chronicles games. There were way too many long-winded cutscenes that didn't complement the story at all, and the gameplay is just a mess. At one point it wants to be an action RPG, but then you'll also get strategy elements from the Chronicles games, and it does not mesh well at all. Thankfully, we do know that a Valkyria Chronicles 4 is coming, and that is shaping up very nicely. However, Valkyria Revolution was a definite disappointment to Valkyria fans. Lawbreakers. Boss Key Productions and Cliff Bleszinski, the creator of Gears of War, were hyping up Lawbreakers to be the next evolution of first-person shooter gameplay, and Cliff Bleszinski was making it sound like Lawbreakers was gonna be that next big FPS. However, that did not come to fruition. While the fundamental components of Lawbreakers are actually pretty good, the issue really stems from the fact that this wasn't a game that really resonated with gamers, and if a game doesn't resonate with gamers, especially being a multiplayer-only first-person shooter, well, then you've got some real issues. years. To give you guys an idea of how quickly this game diminished, while we don't have PlayStation 4 numbers, a little over 4 months after the release of the PC version, Lawbreakers is down to well under 100 players at any given time on PC. That is embarrassing. Now, Cliff Bleszinski has said the PlayStation 4 version is doing much better than that, but we don't have any stats on that, and from personal experience, it doesn't seem that much better. From a game that had as big of a marketing push as this, you had Cliff Bleszinski working on it, we were just expecting a lot more, and this is gonna be an FPS 6 months from now everybody will probably have forgotten about. Agents of Mayhem. Volition has created some awesome open world games with the Saints Row titles, and Agents of Mayhem was looked by many as the next iteration of Saints Row. And there are some strong elements of Agents of Mayhem. You've got a lot of different characters and they all have their zany quirks, and it's got some fun combat. However, it doesn't really have a soul of its own. It's a game called Agents of Mayhem, and while that Saints Row emphasis is there, it always came across as a poor attempt of being Saints Row instead of an evolution of Saints Row, and that was the main issue. Volition is a very talented studio, and I'm sure they're gonna put out something quality in the future, but Agents of Mayhem was a gigantic fumble. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. This is another game, speaking from a personal standpoint, that really disappointed me. I've been a big fan of the Marvel vs. Capcom titles, and Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was really lacking. What it reminded me a lot of was Street Fighter V from a content standpoint, in the fact that the game was really stripped down in terms of content, but I'll get to that in a little bit. First of all, right away looking at Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, you can immediately notice the stark presentation shift, and that did nothing good for Marvel vs. Capcom. Outside of that, the major complaint was the content in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. The roster was very small, and worst of all, a lot of the characters that you would have expected to be a part of the base game are being released as DLC and overpriced at that. You can't defend that at all, and it's a shame that Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite went that route. Hopefully at some point we do see a complete version of the game that's released at a cheap price, but at this current moment, Infinite just isn't worth it. Need for Speed Payback. Need for Speed is one of those franchises that's always up and down. You had great games like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, Need for Speed Rivals was pretty good, but then you had games like Need for Speed, and of course, Need for Speed Payback. Need for Speed Payback just screams to be a B-level action racing movie instead of a quality racing title. It's got very scripted presentation instead of being a do-it-yourself open-world racing game. And of course, being an EA title, you know that this game is littered with microtransactions, which does no favors either. Customizability were limited, and mechanically, the game wasn't that great either. There are a lot of better racing game options available. Need for Speed is a franchise that's been going really downhill. Hopefully, we get another quality title at some point, but after Need for Speed and now Need for Speed Payback, it's looking kind of bleak. Sonic Forces. Sonic is another franchise like Need for Speed that's always up and down. You've got quality games sometimes, and then you've got games that are just completely misses, and 2017 saw a Sonic game from both sides of the spectrum. We saw Sonic Mania earlier on in the year, and that was a fantastic game, and it really was a return to form for Sonic, and initially, while looking at the trailers and demos, Sonic Forces did look like a pretty good game. It was released at a budget price, but even for that, the game was just not worth it. It was very shallow, and it was just very generic in many areas, and all that positive momentum that Sonic Mania created, Sonic Forces unfortunately just kind of derailed that. But for fans of Sonic, this is to be expected. With titles such as Sonic Unleashed, Sonic and the Black Knight, we've definitely seen worse than Sonic Forces before, but is that really a good way to go about Sonic games? Okay, we've seen worse. At the end of the day, Sonic Forces was just not very good. I'm sure we'll see a great Sonic game down the line, but the up and down trajectory of Sonic has to stop at some point if it wants to reclaim its throne as a major franchise. ELEX. ELEX was a game that wasn't getting a gigantic amount of anticipation behind it, but it did have a very interesting premise. It was being described as an edgy, dark, uncompromising, and complex post-apocalyptic sci-fi RPG where you're a part of the war for a powerful resource known as ELEX. It gives people magic-like powers, and presentation and setting-wise, the game is very interesting. It's a mix of futuristic and medieval locations. You've got guns and swords, and when you hear that explanation, ELEX sounds like a very interesting game. However, it just comes across as a low-budget RPG, and in a generation where you have so many big-budget RPGs, the Bethesda titles, The Witcher, Final Fantasy 15, I can go on and on, ELEX just comes across as a major step down below from that, and that is unfortunate because the premise of the game is so unique. And finally, Drawn to Death. Drawn to Death was a game being directed by David Jaffe, who is famous for Twisted Metal as well as God of War. And with Jaffe, you know that his games are going to be over the top, and Drawn to Death definitely exemplifies that. The stylistic presentation of the game being from a children's sketchbook is very interesting. It's super unique, nothing similar to any other games that you see. However, unique presentation can only get you so far when the fundamentals aren't on point, and that's the issue with Drawn to Death. That presentation is great for the first few games where the novelty is fresh, but then when you realize the barren mechanics, the lackluster physics, or weapon design, Drawn to Death is a multiplayer game that's not going to keep you engaged for long, and that is unfortunate. You can make a legitimate argument that this was the most disappointing PlayStation 4 exclusive to date, and from Jaffe, you would have expected a lot better. So that wraps up 12 PlayStation 4 titles that disappointed us in 2017. What do you think? Were you big fans of any of these games? Let us know in the comments section down below. Were there any other games that disappointed you even more than these? You can put that in the comments as well. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.